Monsanto was originally founded as a chemical company in 1901 by John Francis Queeny. Queeny was in his 40s by that point, and he had had a pretty rough start to his life. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 left his family homeless when he was only 12. He had to quit his education in order to start working full-time as an office boy at a wholesale drug firm. Through hard work and dedication, John climbed the ranks of the pharmaceutical industry, and he eventually moved to St. Louis in 1891 as a representative of the Mayer Brothers Drug Company, the largest drug distributor at the time. 5 years later, John married Olga Monsanto, and when he decided to establish a business of his own in 1901, he named his company after her. John established Monsanto in order to produce saccharin, an artificial sweetener that is 300 times sweeter than table sugar and has effectively no nutritional value. Saccharin was first synthesized in 1879, and although it is a wildly popular sugar substitute today, back in the 1900s nobody in the US had even heard of it. Germany had a near monopoly on its production, and there wasn't a single manufacturer in the United States. John's newly established business was the first US saccharin producer, and the American market turned out to be very lucrative. One of his earliest customers was actually the Coca-Cola Company, which still uses saccharin in its popular Diet Cokes. By 1905, John had added 2 more food additives to Monsanto's repertoire, vanillin and coumarin, which, up until then, were also produced only by Germany. In its first decade, Monsanto barely turned a profit because the Germans were constantly undercutting them. When the United States declared war on Germany in 1917, though, all chemical imports were halted, leaving a huge void in the market that Monsanto was more than happy to fill. Its revenue jumped from $81,000 in 1913 to $905,000 in 1919, establishing Monsanto as one of the big US chemical companies. 1919 also marked Monsanto's first steps abroad when it acquired a Welsh chemical producer that made aspirin and rubber catalyzers. This was Monsanto's first big acquisition, but it would definitely not be the last. The 1920s saw Monsanto expand its product range to feature industrial chemicals, the most notable one being polychlorinated biphenyl, or PCB. Now, PCBs can come in various molecular configurations, 209 to be precise, and all of them are very toxic. They're proven carcinogens and pollutants that are resistant to acids and heat and need about 200 days of direct sunlight just to start breaking down. If you're thinking this was some exotic, rarely used chemical, you'd be wrong. PCBs were used as coolants in various electrical devices prior to the 1970s, most notably in power transformers and capacitors. Odds are, if you go to some of the more neglected cities in your state, you'd find transformers with PCB warning labels there. Monsanto was the only US producer of PCBs for almost 50 years before Congress finally banned the substance in 1979. Internal documents leaked in 2002 show that Monsanto was well aware of the toxicity of PCBs more than a decade before their eventual ban. In fact, Monsanto's first move at circumventing environmental laws happened all the way back in 1926 when the company incorporated a town in Illinois called, you guessed it, Monsanto. Back then, local jurisdictions were responsible for most environmental laws, and Monsanto the town was very lenient with its regulations, so much so that Monsanto the company built its largest PCB factory there. That town still exists, by the way, but it's called Sauget now, and it has barely 159 residents. The case with PCBs is one of the earliest examples of Monsanto's extreme for-profit culture that has by now become nothing short of an immortal internet meme. The sad thing is that Monsanto's awful reputation is actually pretty well deserved, but you'll see more about that a little bit later. So, by the time the Second World War had started in 1939, Monsanto had established itself as the US military's premier chemical supplier. Their most valuable product at the time was styrene, a compound crucial for the production of synthetic rubber. Interestingly enough, Monsanto was also a large contributor to the Manhattan Project. They were instrumental in the development of the polonium-based initiators used in the 2 atomic bombs dropped on Japan. During the post-war decades, Monsanto got into the agriculture business by developing pesticides. Their first one, called dichloro-diphenyl-trichloroethane, or DDT, went into production in 1944 and was banned less than 30 years later due to its extreme toxicity. Another herbicide produced by Monsanto was Agent Orange, which became infamous after the US military used it as a defoliant during Operation Ranch Hand of the Vietnam War. Agent Orange was very effective at destroying the crops of the Viet Cong, but it was so toxic that it also ended up contaminating more than 3 million people and causing 500,000 Vietnamese children to be born with deformities. The early 1970s saw Monsanto make huge progress in the development of LED lights. In fact, Monsanto was the first company to mass-produce them, which brought the price of LEDs down from $200 to less than 10 cents apiece. Just a few years later, though, the US government finally cracked down on Monsanto's reckless use of harmful chemicals. The bans on PCBs and several pesticides hurt Monsanto's revenue greatly, and on top of that, several class action lawsuits were initiated that ended up costing hundreds of millions of dollars. In this period of distress, Monsanto's executives decided to shift the company's focus away from chemical production and towards agricultural biotechnology. This transition occurred during the early 1980s, and back then biotechnology was a very young science. Monsanto was early to the party, which gave the company's immense R&D division a head start. In 1983, Monsanto scientists led by Robert Fraley became the first in history to genetically modify plants. This pivotal achievement ushered in a new era for agriculture, the era of GMOs. Now, despite what the armchair experts from Twitter might be telling you, genetically modified crops are not bad in and of themselves. The reason there is such a negative perception of GMOs is that, as has happened numerous times in history, people take a good thing, and out of greed they take it so far that it eventually becomes a bad thing. GMO crops are a perfect example of this. There are a number of ways to genetically modify a crop without compromising the health of the people who eat it. Some of the most basic ones are shortening the plant's seed-to-seed period or outright pumping up the size of the resulting fruit or vegetable. Monsanto, however, in their quest for ever-increasing yield, took GMO crops to a whole new level. Back in the early 1980s, when Monsanto was faced with a slew of lawsuits and a ban on its best products, they discovered glyphosate, an extremely potent herbicide that saved the company from potential bankruptcy. Monsanto marketed their herbicide under the name Roundup, and in the span of just 2 decades it became the most widely used herbicide in the United States. The reason for its success lies in Monsanto's development of GMO crops. You see, in the past, farmers had to plant their seeds a good deal away from each other. They needed that space in order to till their fields, otherwise weeds would grow around their crops and kill them. When Monsanto developed GMO crops that were resistant to Roundup, however, a whole new avenue of cultivation emerged. Suddenly, farmers could plant their crops much closer together, since they could just dump tons of Roundup directly onto their crops without harming them. As you can imagine, this was a huge increase in crop yield, and combined with the cost reduction of not having to till the land as much, farmers quickly switched to Monsanto's GMO solution. Up until the year 2000, Monsanto was the sole producer of glyphosate due to the patents they held, and it is during this time that the company expanded into the titan that it is today. Roundup was, of course, just the beginning, and since then Monsanto has spent tens of billions into the development of various pesticides and seeds. Last year alone they spent $1.5 billion on R&D, and these investments have more than paid off. 2 years ago, Monsanto's GMO seeds accounted for 80% of the USA's total corn acreage, and today that number is even higher. One reason for Monsanto's immense success in the seed business is their creative use of patents on their seeds. Farmers who plant Monsanto's GMO seeds are subject to strict rules about what they can actually do with them. They are not allowed, for example, to replant these seeds, nor to sell or share them with anyone else, thus ensuring that Monsanto's revenue remains stable and growing. The language of these rules is so convoluted that farmers could potentially be found liable even in cases when the wind randomly blows Monsanto seeds from a neighbor's farm. To complete its transformation into an agricultural behemoth, in 1997 Monsanto spun off the entirety of its chemical business into a separate company called Solutia. This was Monsanto's attempt at a fresh start, and on their website they even claimed to be a relatively new company that just happens to share the same name with its polluting predecessor. Of course, this was all for show, as the new Monsanto's executives were the same people that had led the old company for decades. What they did with Solutia was to essentially try to wash their hands off Monsanto's morally questionable past. Solutia inherited not only the struggling chemical business, but also the majority of litigation relating to Monsanto's PCBs and other industrial pollutants. It probably won't come as a surprise that just 6 years later, Solutia filed for bankruptcy, only to be eventually swallowed up by the Eastman Chemical Company. The new Monsanto, of course, has been incapable of shaking off its bad reputation, but that hasn't stopped its global expansion. Today, it's bigger than ever, with $15 billion of revenue just from last year alone. About half of that money, by the way, came from the sales of the Roundup pesticide and the GMO seeds resistant to it. It's sad how, despite all of the boycotting and controversies, Monsanto's products are so ingrained in modern agriculture that there's just no getting rid of them. By all accounts, Monsanto is here to stay, but it's actually...
Now let's talk about the products of Monsanto that proves to be unethical. Number 1. Saccharin. What is it? Plain and simple, saccharin is an artificial sweetener. Around since the 1800s, saccharin did not become widely popular as an alternative to sugar until the 20th century, thanks in large part to the efforts of Monsanto, which intended to produce saccharin for Coca-Cola. Why is it bad? Initially praised for its ability to provide sweetness without the calories, saccharin fell under fire in the 1970s when a study revealed that it caused cancer in test rats and mice, leading it to be listed on the NIH's carcinogen list. However, after mounting pressures, the study was disregarded as flawed in its conclusions. The sweetener was removed from the list, and can to this day be found in a lot of what we consume. Where is it being used? Drinks, candies, cookies, medicines, gum, fruit spreads, toothpaste, and more. Number 2. PCBs. What is it? PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, belong to a family of man-made organic chemicals known as chlorinated hydrocarbons. They were first used by Monsanto in the 1920s to produce coolant fluids for widely used electric transformers, capacitors, and electric motors. They were domestically manufactured from 1929 to 1979, at which point they were banned. Why is it bad? PCBs have been linked to causing cancer as well as contributing to a number of adverse health effects on the human immune, reproductive, nervous, and endocrine systems. Where is it being used? Banned since 1979, PCBs are no longer being used, but the damage continues to persist, as a 2011 study showed that they are still being found in the blood of pregnant women. Prior to the ban, PCBs were found in widely used items such as, but not limited to, cable insulation, caulking, plastics, adhesives, and oil-based paints. Number 3. Polystyrene. What is it? Still widely used to this day. Polystyrene is a synthetic polymer. Polystyrene production became a focus of Monsanto in 1941. Why is it bad? Polystyrene is non-biodegradable and is responsible for the most total hazardous waste worldwide. Chronic exposure to it has also been tied to depression, headaches, fatigue, and weakness. Where is it being used? Literally everywhere, but most commonly in food packaging, where it is known as styrofoam. It has solidified its place in the market as being more durable than paper products and more cost-efficient than plastic, which isn't much better for the environment. Number 4. Nuclear weapons. I don't think these need much of an explanation as to what they are, why they are bad, or where they are being used, but it is interesting to look at Monsanto's involvement. Shortly after they acquired Thomas and Hochwald Laboratories, Monsanto developed a department that played a key role in the Manhattan Project from 1943 to 1945, responsible for producing the first atomic bombs for the Second World War. Number 5. DDT. What is it? DDT, dichlorodiphenyltrichloroethane, was a commonly used pesticide designed to combat malaria-transmitting mosquitoes. Monsanto T happened to be one of the first manufacturers of the insecticide that would later fall under heavy scrutiny. Why is it bad? Banned in 1972, DDT has been linked to damaging the liver, reducing reproductive success, and causing temporary damages to the nervous system, amongst other dangers. Where is it being used? Unfortunately, DDT can often take more than 15 years to break down and is still being found in some soils and many waterways. Our exposure to it would more than likely come through consuming contaminated fish and crops, or through atmospheric deposition. Number 6. Dioxin. What is it? Dioxins are a group of chemically related compounds that some see as amongst the most toxic chemicals known to science. Monsanto found themselves involved in 1945 when they began promoting the use of chemical pesticides in agriculture. Why is it bad? Dioxins are most notably dangerous for their ability to accumulate in the food chain. And an EPA report once confirmed dioxins as a cancer hazard to humans. Where is it being used? Rather than used, dioxins are primarily being found in meat and dairy products due to how integrated they have become within the food chain. Number 7. Agent Orange. What is it? A herbicide, defoliant primarily used as a form of chemical warfare during the Vietnam War. Monsanto conveniently happened to be one of the two major manufacturers of the lethal weapon. Why is it bad? Agent Orange is said to be responsible for over 400,000 deaths and 500,000 birth defects, with over 1 million suffering from health problems of some kind. Agent Orange's issue lay in its dioxin contamination, something that Monsanto apparently knew about when it sold it to the US government for use in war. Where is it being used? The implications of Agent Orange in Vietnam are still being felt, with a formal cleanup effort not beginning until 2012. A shocking side note is that some chemicals found in Agent Orange can still be found in certain herbicides being used today. Number 8. Petroleum-based fertilizers. What is it? As the name suggests, petroleum-based fertilizers are a type of material applied to soils or plant tissues to aid in the development. Monsanto got themselves involved in 1955 after purchasing a major oil refinery. Why is it bad? Petroleum-based fertilizers have been known to destroy beneficial soil microorganisms. This destruction eventually sterilizes the soil, making it fully dependent on an external stimulant to produce. Where is it being used? In farms across the globe, since they are noted to give farmers a greater degree of control of what they grow and how it turns out. Number 9. Roundup. What is it? Roundup herbicide, also known as glyphosate, a major component of Monsanto's Roundup herbicide, is the most widely used herbicide around the world. It was in 1970 that Monsanto founded their agricultural chemicals division, with Roundup being the prized herbicide. Why is it bad? Glyphosate has been linked to cancer in several studies due to its properties as a potential endocrine disruptor, chemicals that can interfere with mammalian hormonal systems. These disruptors can cause development disorders, birth defects, and cancerous tumors. Where is it being used? Roundup is approved and still widely used today to destroy and control weeds. It can be found in our groundwater, soil, streams, and even in the air. Number 10. Aspartame. What is it? Like saccharin, aspartame is another artificial sweetener used as a sugar substitute in food and drinks. Monsanto managed to get themselves involved in 1985 when they acquired the primary company responsible for aspartame's manufacture. Why is it bad? Rather than delve into this, I highly suggest you check out any of the following articles related to aspartame that we have already released. Where is it being used? Aspartame is still widely used and can be found in diet sodas, yogurts, gum, sauces, drink powders, cereals, and much more. Number 11. Bovine growth hormone (RBGH). What is it? Developed by Monsanto, RBGH is a genetically modified hormone that is injected into dairy cows to produce more milk. Why is it bad? By artificially increasing milk production, RBGH also raises the levels of pus, antibiotic residues, and a cancer-accelerating hormone called IGF-1. When consumed by humans, it continues to act as a cancer accelerator and has been linked to breast, colon, and prostate cancer. Where is it being used? RBGH is still being used to this day and is normally injected into dairy cows every other week. Number 12. GMOs. What is it? This certainly requires no explanation, and it's widely known that Monsanto lies at the foundation of these products. In the early 1990s, Monsanto began their initiatives that still continue to this day under the misguided assertion that they help feed the world. Why is it bad? As I did with aspartame, I will give you a series of articles to look at rather than delve into the depths of what make GMOs bad. Where is it being used? GMOs are prevalent in many crops, but most notably in sugar beets, potatoes, corn, tomatoes, squash, golden rice, soybeans, salmon, and animal feeds. Thank you for watching. This video presentation is brought to you by the fantastic team, with members Brother Lindley Sionosa, Rosemary Monteflor, and Ray Levencianado.